So, minutes, did everyone get an opportunity to take a look at it? And if so, may I have a motion to approve the minutes or adjust any changes?
I move we approve the minutes.
Second.
Okay, good, minutes are approved. Okay, so we've got the consent agenda. I have some questions about the SAFER budget amendment. So maybe if the chief would come up. We talked ahead of time about this, but the 70, first, so what would happen, or what would be the process if we did not approve this budget amendment? So for the people listening, we're talking about the, what does SAFER stand for? Staffing for
Staffing
adequate
adequate
fire and emergency response.
Yeah.
So we've been awarded a federal grant to hire folks, and what is required is a $72,000 budget amendment, which was not budgeted. And so the first question I have is, what happens, what would be the process if we did not accept this from a regulations perspective, but also from an operational perspective?
I'll have to research that to find out as far as a regulations perspective. I know that for us to apply for the grant, we had to get council authorization to not only apply, but also to receive the funds, which took place in October of 2018. So what we would do is we go back to FEMA and say that council is reversing that action and find out. I don't think there would be fiscal penalties. There may be an inability to apply in the future. Maybe, I don't know. I'd have to research that and find that out.
And from an operational perspective, have the folks been, so the FEMA is funding 6 firefighters at a cost of $535,000. And so are those firefighters already in place? Or?
No, they're scheduled to start later next month, pending council approval.
Okay.
But they have, we know who they are. They have been selected. They have been given letters of offer. So.
But they haven't gone through the training?
Correct, yeah. That training would be 6 months long, starting in November.
Okay. And we have not identified where those funds would come from at this point.
So, obviously would consult with our budget staff, but typically, my gut would be is that the first place that they would come from this fiscal year would be salary savings from retirements and things of that nature. If that was not enough to cover that, then I would assume it would be from other operational savings within the fire department's budget, but that would certainly be something that I would need to speak with these folks about.
Okay. So I can support this, except that what I would like to see is, before it comes to council, I'd like to really, because I'd like us to say definitively this is where it's coming from, because right now the way it reads is it's coming out of the fund balance. And, I think it's a little early in the year to be taken to adjusting our fund balance. And unfortunately, it's a little early in the year for the finance department to be, saying, oh, we're going to be under budget, since it's not even the end of October.
Sure.
So, again, I'd be supportive of this if when this comes to council in November, that we identify it and hopefully it comes out of the fire department's budget so that other departments aren't on the hook for it.
Right.
But what other questions do you have?
Hey, Chief, I just had one on the SAFER grant. If I understand this correctly, this is what ends up happening is we have the grant. Assuming we make whatever match that is, that grant lasts for a couple of years and then it goes away, right? Correct. Do we then still have the requirement to maintain that same staffing level?
No, sir. Former versions of the SAFER grant,
that's out.
That's no longer a requirement.
Okay, understood. Okay, thank you, sir.
And then I think the other thing is let's put it in our tickler to make sure that the budget for next year includes that 72,000. And did you tell me that it's already a 3-year grant, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So again, in 21, 22, the 188,000 is in there. Just, you know, it's a little weird to apply for a grant and then not budget for it when we actually got it last year. So I'm a little thrown off by that, how that happened.
Well, and so we were actually awarded this year. It was last year that we sought council approval to apply for and receive funds if awarded, so.
Oh, right, I'm sorry, I
Yeah,
apologize.
yeah, we were just notified last month, so.
Any other questions about? Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you need a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Do you have any other questions about the other items on the consent agenda?
I'm happy to make a motion that we approve the consent agenda.
Second.
And I would also agree with that with the noted issues that I talked about when it comes to. Okay, very good, and thank you. See, at least I can say a bunch come out of APD. That's what I said. I said, yeah, fun fact. Only kidding. We're only kidding. Okay. Barbara?
My name is Barbara Whitehorn, Chief Financial Officer. Most significant for us to handle today is determining how we want to structure the meeting next month that is joint with the audit committee, and how we want to deal with an additional meeting maybe in earlier December. I think the initial thought was November 18th, is that the, 21st. I don't know where the 18th came from, 21st. And I know you, Gwen, had asked that it be at 3:30 with the audit committee. Patricia?
Because we put MPO at
Gwen was asking if we could move it to 3:30.
21st.
No.
It's gonna be a busy meeting. If you're so willing to stay late.
It's a Thursday, right? Yeah.
Yeah, the third. I think it's normally the fourth, but, because of how, because of,
It's always the third.
no, I'm sorry for MPO.
Oh.
We're talking about another.
See, this is the problem. I want to put it on both of my calendars, so
Okay.
it only shows up in some places.
So what I was, okay, so we wanted to do a joint meeting with the audit committee and the finance committee to basically go through the audit results. So we're kind of under a deadline there. We can't really push that off because it would be appropriate for us to look at that before it actually gets issued. But, we have a lot of things on our agenda, and so what we were kind of thinking is 3:30, August 21st, and we would just have the auditors, and we would have the debt capacity presentation. And then we would, I guess we'll just, we need to decide on, maybe December 10th for another finance committee meeting to get some of the other items that are on the agenda, and that, and then obviously cancel our December 24th meeting, obviously, unless we want to be here on Christmas Eve. Is that, how's December 10th look for you? How's December 10th look for staff? So, sometime in the afternoon, I've got boards and commissions at 4:15, but you guys can.
Do you want to do 1:30 as usual?
That would work for me, sure.
I think that's probably easiest for staff. I know the audit committee portion of the meeting, they have a fairly big agenda. So maybe the audit committee should start at 3, and then we should start the joint meeting at 3:30?
Does that work?
Because I just won't be able to, I think we have a big meeting at the MPO, because that's when we come.
So that would just give the audit committee a chance to deal with their issues not to do with the annual audit, and then we would start the joint meeting at 3:30.
Well, there's gonna be a budget presentation, so if we start with that, I feel like you understand the budget process.
Okay.
So, more so than the rest of the audit committee.
Okay.
I'll work.
Okay, I think we had already tentatively set aside the 21st anyway, so, okay.
So remind me,
So you are on the hook for November 21st at
Okay.
3:30 to 5, and December 10th at 1:30. And take off the December 24th meeting.
And the November.
Oh, yeah, we had another one, yeah. So we'll just have one meeting, December 10th for our November and December meeting.
Well, you'll have the
Well, we'll have one
DC
in
stuff and all
November.
that, but yeah.
So we will not meet on the 26th.
Exactly. Okay, all right, well, that was painful. Okay,
Okay, and then previously at our last committee meeting, you all had asked about the Great Recession and how that impacted revenues and how that impacted fund balance. And so the budget team has put together a presentation, and you have copies of it because some of it is a little small and this screen isn't ideal. And we will post it online for anyone who's watching today. But I'm going to turn it over to Tony McDowell, our budget director.
All right, okay, I'll stay next. All right, so like Barbara said, we just wanted to do a quick follow-up from the last meeting when Barbara gave a presentation about the current economic climate and some of the darkening economic clouds that we were seeing. So there's some questions that came up near the end about how the last recession impacted fund balance. So just as a reminder, the Great Recession from in the late part of between 2007 and 2009 officially started in December of 2007 and officially ended in June 2009. So what that meant for us was when the recession started in December, we were about halfway through the 2007-2008 fiscal year. So we'd already adopted the budget in June of that year, and we were moving through that fiscal year. And if you all remember, the recession came on pretty quickly then. I mean, there were not a whole lot of signs that we were headed toward any kind of downturn, but with the financial crisis, things happened pretty quickly. And that'll be relevant as I get to the next slide or two. So, and then the other thing we would want to point out is that the impacts were felt for us far beyond 2009 when the recession officially ended. So, next slide. Okay, so at the last meeting, there was some discussion about how far fund balance dropped during the recession. So, and I think one of the numbers that was put out was that it dropped $6 million. And so what we want to do is go back and provide a little bit more clarification as to what did happen to fund balance during that time period. So if you look in 2005-2006, fund balance was at approximately $17 million. And then the 2 years that are highlighted there in yellow greenish, those are the years that the recession were going on. And so you can see what happened was between 2006, is there a ringing?
yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, is this just me or?
No,
I can step back if that.
I don't think it's.
I don't think it's, I don't know what it is.
Anyway,
Well, that fixes it.
all right, I'll try and keep going and just ignore that. So fund balance did indeed between 2006 and 2009 drop almost $6 million, but some of that drop was not due to the recession. If you go to the next slide. So like I said, the recession came on in December 2007, and we were about 6 months into the 2007-2008 fiscal year. So if you rewind to June of that year, when we were preparing the budget that year, that's $17 million in fund balance was equal to 32% of our general fund budget at that point, which is well above our 15% policy. So we made a decision that year to appropriate about $4.4 million from fund balance to go toward the capital program and towards some one-time operating expenses. So part of that drop, you see, it's not due to the recession, it's due to this decision that we made about 6 months before the recession started. So in hindsight, obviously, if we'd known what was coming, we probably wouldn't have done that, but at the time we didn't know. So if you go to the next slide, you can see there's that reduction between 2006 and 2007 when we appropriated that $4 million. And so really kind of the starting point for the fund balance before the recession began was the 13.9. So it did indeed drop. So by the time the recession was officially over in 2009, our fund balance was down to $10.5 million. So we saw about a $3 to $3.5 million decline in fund balance that you can attribute to what went on during the recession.
But Tony, on this too, I mean, the fund balance I mean, that number, to put it in context, is only as important relative to whatever the expenditures are, right?
Correct.
And what you guys did, what you don't have on the slide, again, it's not something we asked, was a percent, but also what you did to expenditures. As I recall, expenditures were cut dramatically during that period, whether it was personnel and otherwise, so that, you know, we do see that not only is there a drop in the fund balance, but if you had another line that said like general fund expenditures, we would have seen we would have seen a cut, right?
Yes, those went down as well, correct, yes. And yeah, if we added the percentages out there, you would see that as well. It actually dipped below 15% just a little bit for some of those years. And then it's begun to go back up. You can see we're now back up to, well, as of 17, 18, we were back up to $18 million. But it really didn't get back up to pre-recession levels until 2015, 16. So it took us a while to recover.
Right. But I guess the point I was trying to make on this is that if somebody could just look at this graph, they would just be like, oh, if you have a bad recession, your fund balance will drop by $2.5 million. And, you know, everything else will be fine. But that's not what happened here. I mean, we had layoffs, there's a lot that happened here in that.
Correct.
You know, on the expenditure side. So
Yeah.
anyone who's looking at this reading, it's not, you know, if someone's saying, oh, well, like, that's what we anticipate if we have another recession, is a fund balance dip of $2.5 million, it's not, that wouldn't be it.
Right, it's very difficult to predict. Yeah.
Right.
So, and then just a couple more slides just to finish, to show you how the impact of the recession hit our property tax base. You know, the property tax is 50% of our general fund revenue. So one of the interesting things is, again, the highlighted years are the years the recession was going on. And prior to the recession, you can see we were growing in the 2 to 3% range every year for property taxes. And we actually continued to grow during the recession. And the reason for that is because a lot of the construction projects that came online then were already in the pipe before the recession hit. And so you can see we actually grew, our tax base grew in 2008, 2009, and 2010. But then what happened, and this is typically what happens to property taxes, is it's a lagging indicator. So the construction market dropped out during the recession, and so you can see our property tax base growth was very sluggish, really up until 2016, when it started to grow at what we would consider to be a normal pace again. And then lastly, the sales tax, which is our other big general fund revenue source. You can see the impact there was much different. We actually did see a significant drop in sales taxes during the recession that even continued the year after the recession when it went down another 5.9%. And then finally, the last thing I would say is if you look at the sales tax data, we really did not get back to pre-recession sales tax numbers until 2014. So again, it took several years for us to get back to the amount of sales tax revenue that we were collecting prior to the recession.
Tony, on this, is there, in terms of the taxes, is there a lag between the time we're getting it from the state? Like, is it sort of on a cash basis? So if we were, part of, I guess the question I'm trying to get at is, like, if we were to try and figure out like an early indicator of a possible recession, right? You know, one of the concerns you have with the data is there's usually a time lag. It takes time to get, the money goes to the state reimburses it to us. Like, there's a, you know, either a quarter or 2 quarters or whatever there is. I guess the first question I would ask you is based on what we have now in terms of the revenues, is there an early indicator that we would see? Because usually when you're in a recession, you're already in one by the time you realize you're in one, right?
Yeah, and you're kind of fast forwarding to the financial forecast we're going to talk about later. We do have some information in there, but to answer your question, there's a 3-month lag between when the state collects the sales tax revenue and when they send it back to us. So we just got a few weeks ago the July sales tax revenue, which is the first month for the new fiscal year. So you know, we're already almost 4 months in the fiscal year, and we only have 1 month of data. And I'll show you some of that information once we get to the financial forecast.
So, these are great slides, but on the tax base history, I mean, I know this, you know this, but can we like add a column that says what our property taxes were? Because this, I mean, you know, I know that our property tax did not increase 43% in 2007 because we probably adjusted our rate.
Right, correct.
So can we, I mean, I know that's not what you're trying to talk about here, but can you just slide that in as another column? Just
We can add that.
the rate. Yeah, like,
Yeah.
or what our property tax collections were.
Okay, that's,
So that people, I mean, you know, if I'm looking at this and I don't know the budget the way and don't know the process the way I do, then it looks like, oh, wow, you know, the city's revenues increased 43% in 1 year, which it did not because we adjusted the rate. So can we just put that down? Just-
Sure, we can do that.
It also looks like our property taxes in 2018 were only $14 million, which is not, I mean, that is.
Well, I think we're missing 3 zeros.
Right, well, that's the base, that's not the revenue, that's.
Right,
yeah,
so-
yeah. That's in millions, yeah, that should be.
Right, yeah, so we may want to just say, like, this is in millions, or, and then, if you just slot that in there, just because I do not want people to think.
Right.
And the same thing in 2018, I mean, you know, we didn't, our property taxes did not increase like that, our base increased, but our rate decreased to
Correct.
offset, not all of it. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, any other questions or thoughts?
Well, I mean, the only thing I would ask BJ, I mean, you know, with all of your experience, I mean, this is what you do, what are the indicators? Like, how would we?
right, so I mean, I think we'll wait to hear, you know, I mean, it depends on a lot of kind of, you know, where the revenues go, and I think, you know, Tony, you guys, I'll wait to hear kind of what you guys are seeing in the city. I mean, it depends kind of like, you know, municipality by municipality, when the money's coming in, where the money's coming from, and also, I mean, we're so heavily reliant on property taxes here, that as Tony said, it's a lagging indicator, right? And we could have a good real estate market going on while the rest of the country could be in shambles.
Yeah.
And so a lot of it is kind of, you know, individual specific. But that's why I was sort of asking on this, you know, whether there's, particularly, the sales tax tend to be something that is going to be more volatile as it relates to economic conditions, right? And we saw that here, you know, with what dropped on slide 6. I mean, I would be looking at things like that. You'd be looking at things like, you know, permitting, like new permits that are coming in. I mean, those are typically, and usually if you have larger employers in the area too, what they're doing, are they hiring, are they holding back, you know, are there layoff notices going on? I mean, I think one of the concerns we have in this region, particularly in the manufacturing community, is the impact of tariffs too. So we have one of these weird things where it's like, it's not just a business cycle where you kind of say, all right, what are the data points to look at? You're like, oh, there seems to be like some sort of exogenous pressure. You know, that's a polite way of saying, you know, a lot of really bad federal policy that's happening, that's causing like, that's happening that isn't, anyway, that isn't sort of typical for a business cycle. So I think, you know, I'll wait, Tony, to see kind of where you guys get into that. But I think those are some of the questions, and that's almost where I'm trying to get at, is like, to the extent there's like an early warning system for us in Asheville. You know, I'm not sure if there's a group you convene, you talk to the realtors, right? Like what's going on in the realtors market, like you talk to Mission, you talk to, you know, some of the hospitality folks to see what's been going on in there. I mean, sometimes it's less quantitative and more qualitative. But realistically, by the time, and the reason I keep harping on this is the point we made earlier, which is that like once you're in a recession, like it's too late. You don't know until you're in the middle of it. So now is sort of the time to be thinking about, you know, what's happening with a lot of municipalities and happening with the rating agencies right now is a lot of rating agencies are going to municipalities and saying, what is your recession contingency right now? That's what they're asking for when they're going out for bonds. They're saying, what are you guys doing to, you know, because they're not sure when it's going to happen, but they know it's going to happen. And so the question is like, how well prepared are you going to be? So that's what's happening sort of in the finance world.
Okay. Be back in a few minutes.
Thank you.
All right.
And now, the financial forecast? Wait, did I miss some? Oh, Aston Park, sorry. I apologize. How could I forget?
I know, exactly. Good afternoon. In your packet, you have the financial report this quarter for Ashton Park. As outlined in the current report, the current season, revenues was up 131,000 compared to 126 last quarter. The expenditures also was up 164,000 compared to 154 last quarter. So overall, the subsidy increased by $5,000, overall operating costs. A lot of the revenue increase was due to the admissions and the pass holders. That number was up in terms of the revenue increase. The expenditure increase was, once again, basically employee costs, COLA, personnel costs overall.
Well, what is the other revenue?
That is, the other revenue is like ball rentals, court rentals, that type of activity.
And I mean, that dropped relatively significantly for some.
Yeah, if the pass holders increased, some probably went from paying as they come to paying, buying the purchase of a annual pass.
So you really have to look at, the combination of the revenues.
Correct.
So it didn't, I mean, the revenues in aggregate really only increased 4%. I mean, because ball rentals is as a chunk of other revenue, that's, the vast majority of it is people coming in and just paying the day rate. Is that what you're telling me?
Although non-pass holder court rentals also increased a very small
Small.
amount. So it doesn't, yeah, I mean,
I guess
obviously some people move, but that's why we have the pass holder, because it's a better deal.
Correct.
But we didn't, I would have expected that non-pass holder court rental to actually drop, and it didn't drop, it actually still increased a very little bit, which,
And it's seasonal too, based on the weather. From one year to the next, if you have more rainy days last year than this day, it kind of affects the overall when you're looking apples to apples.
So Roderick, I remember last year when we were here kind of talking about this, the attempt to kind of see the pass versus the day thing. So do we have a feeling that worked? Like, did this work? Did it not work? Is the jury still out? Like, what's kind of like how we feel about it?
It worked in terms of having more pass holders, but your revenue goes down because you don't pay per visit. So you get to play as many times as if you would like with the annual pass holder. So it's actually a better deal to get that annual pass holders.
Right. And when we were here last year, we were trying to figure out, we were trying this, right? Because the concern was that you were going to raise the pass too high, and folks pushed back on it. And so I guess what I'm trying to get at is the net effect of what was done over here, did that do what we thought it was going to do? Is this 4% in line with what we thought was going to happen prior to this? Was it lower than that? This is part of my own memory, and I apologize for not remembering it. But I'm just trying to get a sense of did this do what a lot of folks were arguing that it would do?
Yeah, they kept the pass rate at a flat and not increase, put a more burden on them to purchase it. So that's why you see the number go up in terms of overall purchases. But the revenues didn't increase because we kept the cost of that pass the same, which the business plan called for to be increased. So kind of twofold, it increased the number of purchases, but it did not increase the amount of revenue, like we would like to see, to reduce the subsidy and how much
So
it's subsidized.
we're basically on a path to increase our subsidies.
Yeah, based off personnel costs right now, if we don't increase any operational costs, just by having increased personnel costs, you're going to still continue to have that gap.
and I think after, so we've gone through 2 seasons now with the pass, with knowing the reduced cost, and, like everything else, it's probably time to look again at potentially increasing that. I think, if we remember back, the big outcry was, it was a really significant jump for, I think, almost every category of pass holder. And so I wonder if there is, the opportunity to look at that, look at the numbers now and see about, some smaller increases for next season. I know that's not in our budget, but we've got plenty of time to look at it and look at what impact that could have. So, because, we do this dance every single time, right? When it gets upset that the subsidy's increasing, and I look at all the rest of the numbers, I'm like, it's great, and it is great. It's great. The rest of the numbers are great. But there continues to be this structural kind of deficiency, and, I continue to think that in my experience, when you have kind of this ongoing persistent issue, that, you know, convening a small group of people, and I would say some staff members, some ATA members, maybe some other, people with a long-time interest in Aston, getting a small group of people together, like no more than 10, to figure this out, to really dig into the numbers. And, you know, maybe ATA would come to the table and say, you know what, we're gonna try to raise so much money through the Asheville Open that we're gonna be able to, like Friends of the Nature Center, give $20,000 to Aston Park, and give $20,000 to the city. That might be one outcome. Another outcome might be, you get business-minded people around the table, and they look at the expenses and they think, well, here's a way that you can trim your expenses. I continue to think that is a conversation that hasn't happened yet, and would be very helpful to happen.
Right. We've tried the strategy in different forms and formats. What would be helpful to staff, just like at the Nature Center, if we were given a target, saying we want to reduce the subsidy by this %, then we can come with some recommendations of how to do that. We've never had a target for Aston Park, it's just reduce the subsidy. So if we had some type of number for the group to work with.
I mean, so, you know, okay, next year, I'd say, can we not increase the subsidy
Right.
anymore? And understanding that, you know, our personnel costs and other expenditures are going to increase. We know that for a fact.
Right.
It's part of the nature of the beast. So, I mean, just, could we keep the subsidy the exact same?
Right.
I mean, you know, it's a pretty light target, but, I mean, not even decrease it, just keep it the same.
Correct. Correct.
I mean, and two, I mean, most everything else, and, you know, I get that the approach has been kind of, you know, we go for 7 years and we don't have any increases, and then all of a sudden we try to catch up. I mean, that's kind of a goofy way to do it when you think about it. It's not how you pay your utility bills.
Right.
Normally what happens is every year you kind of have a little 3% increase, blah, blah, blah. I mean, that's how it works. I mean, I would love to see something like that at Aston Park, you know, that it doesn't become a big fight every year.
Correct.
That we just, you know, it's a routine, expected thing. It's not a crazy increase, but it increases in accordance with what our expenses are. And yeah, I'd love to hear from the community if they think there are some great ideas to decrease expenses, or that the community is willing to kick in some money. That'd be great. But, you know, this is not the trend. It's just, we have to.
And some of that, you know, we can get donations, but it's one time. We're looking at ongoing operation budget, so you can have a fundraiser, but it's not sustainable. And one of the things we can do is tie it to the fees and charges and bring that to the finance committee as part of fees and charges each year to say, we expect a 1% increase. This is what it means on the different amounts of revenue we can bring it in terms of charging. So we can kind of balance that out.
What is somebody remind me, what's the cost for a city resident to have a pass?
Thanks, Lord, I don't.
Very,
$3.99.
$399.
I'm just gonna go. So, you know, a 10% increase would be $40 across, and not all of these pass holders are city pass holders, but if you did that, you would eliminate the deficit for this. I mean, you would eliminate not the subsidy, but you would eliminate the increase in the subsidy.
But I mean, I would even propose, 10% is high in one shot. And so what I would say is, you know, maybe it's not the easiest thing to, you know, but I mean, if we're charging $3.99, we're certainly not rounding up to anything. So, you know, I mean, a 2% increase, or 3% increase. But, you know, we put the expectation in that that's what's gonna happen.
Correct.
That, and, you know, if we need to, for the tennis center, put you on a different cycle relative to approving fees, and which I understand that's also, it's a funny time of year for our budget cycle. That's fine. I mean, we'll look at it early. I don't think the other council members are gonna have a problem with, you know, looking at your fees and charges, the Aston Tennis Center's fees and charges on a different cycle than the other, because it's important to get it in place at the beginning of the year, right? I mean, So if we can, just put the expectation in place in the community that these fees are gonna go up every year, just like your utilities go up. And, try not to like stick them with a big chunk at one time and then nothing for 5 years.
So Gwen, could we ask for maybe recommendations on, fee increases and other, anyway, could we ask for recommendations, by our February meeting?
We would need to approve the new fees by February to have them in place for the new
Oh, really?
season.
Okay,
So
so the
we
new
would
season
probably
is
have
what,
to
April
do
1?
recommendations by January
Okay.
for decision making.
I mean, if we ask for that, is that like crazy making? Is that, I mean, is it doable? And again,
It's just.
please don't come back to us with a 20% increase
Correct.
because we will get Hillary.
Correct.
But, again, with this idea of little increases to keep up with our expense, I mean, the expenses are, you're holding those in line. I mean, you're not getting crazy, but our expenses are going up.
Right.
It's all personal.
And just educating the community and getting awareness out there that this is an expectation each
Well,
year.
yeah.
Kind of helps with that.
And I think, again, if you, I'm just gonna say it one more time, if you pull in, I would say, maybe the board of the ATA and, have a conversation with that group, they can be part of a revenue generating stream
Correct.
that you guys can't count on until you have a conversation with them to see if they can help with that. And then, again, I would recommend maybe using that same group, or some other folks to delve into the expense side, just to, there's two sides to this equation. And I mean, I know from talking to people in the community that they have ideas on the expense side, and there just hasn't been a forum for them to share that with you. And frankly, I don't think that's a big public meeting. I think that's a really small meeting that the two of you convene with a small number of people and just have the conversation. So,
We have to bring something back.
Thank you.
thanks.
Okay, now the financial forecast.
Okay, once again, Tony McDowell from the Finance Department. I just want to provide an update on the 5-year general fund financial forecast that we first gave you all back at your retreat in March of this year. And I won't keep you in suspense. I will tell you that when I get to the final slide, which is the graph that you've seen before, not a whole lot's changed. Obviously, over the long term, we're going to be looking at a situation where expenses are growing faster than revenues. But we do have some new data that we plugged in. We have some assumptions that we've tweaked since the last time we talked to you guys. So I'll run through that just quickly with you guys. So first of all, just to remind you what the purpose of forecasting is, and we went through this at the retreat with you all, but it's, it just makes sense. It makes financial sense because we have a $125 million general fund budget. So if we're not doing financial planning, that's just not acceptable. So we do multi-year financial planning. It's a best practice. It's something that's recommended by the Government Finance Officers Association, the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. It's something our rating agencies expect of us when they're reviewing our debt issuances. So it's just best practice. It also provides a decision-making tool that allows us to look at the long-term impacts of decisions that are made in any given budget year. So we can look past, if we implement a service and we only implement that service for half a year, we can look at how that's going to impact the future year's budget and the years after that as well. And then it's just transparency again. Making folks aware of how current decisions are impacting us over the long term. So some of the forecasting techniques we used, and we went through this with you all at the retreat, we primarily relied on a 5-year trend analysis for both our revenues and expenses. We review existing plans to identify any known future expenses. And so, for example, we are going to begin construction on a new fire station in the Montford area. And so we built into our 5-year forecast the expenses of the additional firefighters coming on board when that construction is complete. Also, for example, if council approves the SAFER grant, we'll go ahead and build in those city matches for the upcoming forecast period as well. So that's kind of what that second bullet is referring to there. Third bullet, obviously, we look at the impact of potential economic changes, just like we were discussing a few minutes ago. We're really a long way into the current economic expansion cycle, and there are some signs that perhaps there's a slowdown coming, so we want to make sure that we adjust any of our assumptions for sales tax revenues and some of our other revenues to reflect that current economic circumstances. And then finally, we research financial trends for significant city cost drivers. And probably the best example there is healthcare. Healthcare budget for the city is somewhere in the neighborhood of $10 to $12 million. And so we look at trends not only nationwide, but we look at our own trends that we've been experiencing here as well. Let me try putting this down. That helps. Does it feel alarm? Okay, if I can bring this back up. Okay, all right. So, and we also look at things, for example, like our fuel price trends nationwide and locally as well. So with that being said, just to remind you all again of the timeline, we first presented the current forecast model that we're using at your March 2019 City Council retreat, and then we updated some of the numbers in the forecast based on budget decisions that were made in June when you all adopted the FY20 budget, and we published the financial forecast in our adopted budget document. If anyone wants to go take a look, it's on pages B33 and 34 of the document. First time in a while we've had it in our budget document, so we're pretty proud of that. So just to kind of give you an update, so how did we finish last year? So when we did the estimate in June of this year, in the general fund, we were estimating that revenues were going to exceed expenses by about $950,000. And what I'm calling near final actuals right now, because as you all know, you're meeting next month to go over the audit. And so the accounting staff is wrapping up the comprehensive annual financial report. It's close to being finished, but I didn't want to call things actuals yet until we submit the information to the state. But it's pretty close to being final. And so where we ended, or looks like we're going to end the year in the general fund is with revenues exceeding expenses by about 1.7. So we did better than we thought we were going to do. And I know that may sound like a big difference. It's about $750,000 more than we'd estimated. But in a $125 million budget, it's about 0.6%. So we were close. We were very close. And we feel pretty good about I know. We wanted to be perfect, but, maybe next year.
Do you know what I mean, I know it's not a ton, but it's 800,000. Do you know what that was?
Yeah,
Okay.
next slide. So the main thing, the main difference was that, so it's really on the revenue side of the budget. We did better than we thought. We were conservative in our estimates, and so our two major revenues, we had really good growth year over year in both property taxes and sales taxes. Property taxes were up 3.7%, and if you remember from that previous presentation a few moments ago, that's well above any kind of year-to-year growth we've seen in a while. So that was really good. And also sales taxes, we had budgeted a 5% increase, and they ended up at 8.7%, which again is surprising considering how long we've been in this economic expansion, that we're still seeing sales taxes growing by that bigger percentage. So overall revenues came in about 3% above budget. So that's better than we've done in the last few years.
Tony, is there any like one-timer stuff in the property taxes up to 3.7%? Like, is it, any large projects that kind of went online that we didn't realize, or was this kind of organic 3.7%?
I don't know if there are any large projects that impacted that. We can check and see.
I'm just wondering whether, again, that's just as a.
But that would have been in our budget. I mean, unless it moved from one year to another.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely wasn't any kind of one-time bump, but yeah, there could have, like you're saying, there could have been a large project that came on board. We can research that with the county tax office and see.
Right. I guess what I'm trying to get at is if to the extent we know this or don't know it, you don't have to drill down completely. If people say now, well, 1 year doesn't make a trend, but is there a question if the 3.7% is really kind of just
Right.
like the organic growth? Like there was no tax increase last year. Just the way things were going, we ended up with 3.7%.
Yeah, and we can definitely look into that.
So this is really important because of a presentation that we're going to get at council tonight around transit. And, what we committed to do as part of the budget process earlier this year is look for the revenue to expand the hours of transit as soon as we can, possibly even in this fiscal year, if that's possible. So what this says to me is there actually is potentially revenue to do that.
This is
I mean,
fun.
Give us 2 more slides.
This is, yeah, this is last
Well,
year's number.
so,
This is last year's number. This is.
wait, so go back. So I
Yeah, so-
thought this is projecting what we would
Oh, no, no,
end
no,
fund
no.
balance with.
No, this is how this is last year.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
This is June 30, 2019.
which is good news for the current year, but there are a couple slides
Sorry.
on here, you'll see some information on that. But-
Okay.
All right, so, any more questions? No, okay, all right, so on the expense side, expenses for FY19 were up about 3.5% compared to FY18, and they came in at 95% of budget. So one thing I want to point out here is, when you look at our financial reports, and you look at our CAFR, the expenses are actual expenses, so that's checks we wrote or money we wired that went out the door. What's not reflected in that is purchase orders and contracts that may have been entered into last year, but not fully expensed, and so those get rolled to the current year. So when you add in those contracts and purchase orders against, and compare that against the budget, so in my mind, that's how much you committed of your budget, your actuals plus your encumbrances. We came in at 98%. So that's, for us in the budget world, that's kind of where you want to be. It's not so close to budget that you're risking going over, but it's also not so far under that you're thinking there's places you can make reductions. So we felt good about that. All right, so next slide. So where do we look like we're headed this year? So, yeah, so the first thing I'd say is, given the performance in revenues last year, we are optimistic that revenues this year are going to perform better than budget. But at the same time, we're cautious because we're really early in the fiscal year. We've only gotten 1 month of sales tax data, and that's actually the next slide I'll show you. And again, the signs out there are pointing toward a slowing economy. So we really want to be cautious and not overcommit ourselves to new services at this point would be our recommendation. So next slide. And so this one, I just want to take just a moment to talk about sales taxes because it is such a big part of the general fund budget. And one of the things that's going to be an interesting dynamic this year that's going to make it a little bit hard for us to convey how we're doing and look at the economic trends is that with the mission sale and it becoming a private provider now, we're getting additional sales tax revenue from them. So again, just to take a moment to kind of get down in the weeds of this with you. So what happens is we get sales tax revenue from the state of North Carolina on a monthly basis. It comes to the county. And they report out on how much sales tax revenue was collected in Buncombe County in each month. And so in July of 2018, there were $12.8 million in sales tax revenue collected in Buncombe County. This year, it was 12.6, so it actually went down by 1.6%. So for us, we're looking at that in terms of economic indicators and going, you know, this may be a slowing economy. And we also saw, I'm not showing the data, but we saw some of the months at the end of last fiscal year too, also slowing down to around a 3% growth. So we may be seeing some slowing in our economic growth and our sales tax collection. But what happened was, the way the system works in North Carolina is nonprofits, like City of Asheville, when Mission was a nonprofit, they pay sales taxes and then they apply for refunds from the state of North Carolina. And they typically do it 2 or 3 times a year, Mission does. And so, in previous years, in July, they would typically apply for most of their refunds. And so you can see July 18, there was $4.7 million in refunds. This year, since Mission is no longer eligible for those, it was only 1.1. So the bottom line here is, if you look at actual collections, they're up 17.5%. So it looks like the economy's going full steam for us, but maybe it's not. So just keep that in mind this year as we come to you all and we continue to update the forecast and we look at sales tax trends. You may see sales tax revenue up quite a bit, but that may not be an indicator of the underlying economic circumstances. Does that make sense?
It just, what you're saying is a big chunk of this is because we've had people convert from a nonprofit to a for-profit.
Right.
And so that's not necessarily, even though our revenues, our sales tax revenues may be up, it's not necessarily indicative of an economic thing.
Correct.
So it's a little bit to BJ's point, you have to really look at the local effects.
Yeah,
So-
you really have to dig down into data. And we did budget, you know, when we all came to you with the budget in May and June, we assumed this extra sales tax revenue coming in from Mission. So it's built into the budget already. Okay, next slide. All right, so what does the 5-year general fund base budget forecast look like? And I'll just remind you all that this is the base budget. So when we do our projections, we're only assuming a continuation of things that have already been approved. We're not building any new services or programs. So how does it look? So just a reminder of the forecast revenue assumptions that we shared with you all back in March. And most of these have not changed. We've left the property tax base growth where it was. We've also continued to assume there'll be no property tax rate increases moving forward. As a reminder, we're going to be getting the additional $2.2 million from Mission HCA in next fiscal year. And then the one thing I would highlight, we did go in and lower our expectations around sales tax growth moving forward. So we had assumed 6% in the current year, and then 4.5%, and then we were kind of tapering it off to 3%. We've gone back to 3% in the current year and 3% moving forward from here. So, and we'll adjust that downward if necessary as we see trends like what I indicated before, yes.
So, when does the first increase for Mission HCA come in? This fiscal year, in 1920?
Yes, so we're getting about 2.8 million in property and sales taxes this year,
In 1920?
1920, and then we'll get another roughly 2.2
In
next year.
2020?
Yes.
Okay.
And we've also continued the assumption that we're not going to use any fund balance moving forward, and that when revaluation occurs in FY22, we will have a revenue neutral tax rate. So, okay. Those are the revenues on the expense side. Again, we've continued spending trends, adjusting salaries based on what we've seen in the past. We've built in a cost increase for the local government retirement system. As you all probably remember, there's a 3-year increase step up that the state is planning for that. We have that built into the model as before. We did build in the full year of transit service that was approved this year. That's going to begin in January. So the additional transit hours that were budgeted for half a year this year, we have them built in for a full year next year and moving forward. We have rad tip costs. Oh, yes.
For the transit. Full year of transit service. Oh, but it is not an increase from where our service is going in January of 1920.
That's correct. Until council approves that
So it
additional.
does not have extending the service hours.
Yes.
in there.
Correct.
So, I would not use this expression then.
Yeah.
I think you have to say, full year of changes, I mean, I know it's a lot of words, but full years of changes in the transit service effective 1/1/20.
Gotcha.
Because full transit, to the
Oh, yeah.
community may mean implementing the entire master plan, which this absolutely does not do.
Correct.
So if we can, make that change sooner rather than later.
Okay.
Because that's a pretty big,
Yes, it is. Agreed. And again, we assume that the rad tip project is going to be at a state where it's going to be complete or near complete, so we'll have maintenance costs that we add to next year's budget. We did push back the additional firefighter staffing a fiscal year to FY22 based on the current construction schedule for the new station. And we have continued funding for our capital and debt model in the assumptions. So with that, I think getting close. So again, just a reminder that this is the baseline forecast, so there's no substantial new or enhanced services included. As you all know, there's a lot of deferred capital maintenance needs that we have talked to you all about. That's not built into the base budget. We're also doing the class and comp study this year, which will eventually come forward with some recommendations, but until we know what those are going to be and what the dollar values are, we have not built that into the forecast. And then we have some other capital improvement projects that we're working on that may have operational impacts, and we're still in the process of determining what all those would be. So we don't have anything other than just the rad tip and the fire station at the moment. And obviously, we're not aware of any new revenue streams, unfortunately, coming our way anytime soon. So we've not built that. So finally, the last one. So again, the chart's going to look very similar to what it did before. The red line is expenses, and you can see that over time, the expenses are growing faster than the revenues. I guess the good news is just for the base budget itself, in the current year, again, you can see we're assuming that revenues are gonna come in slightly above expenses. And going into next year's budget for FY '21, with just the base budget, we anticipate revenues and expenses being very close at the moment. So we hope to start off the base budget at least with revenues and expenses balanced. We'll see as we move through the budget process what that looks like. But then the structural gap reemerges the following year as expenses begin to outpace revenues.
So Tony, to translate the fiscal, so, you know, we're currently in this year, this is fiscal year FY '20, right? I'm sorry, yeah, right,
Correct.
fiscal year '20, right? So we're looking relatively good then for next year's budget. Based on where we are right now, it's to the extent we're looking to enhance anything, at least where the model is projecting right now, we would have to find additional revenues if we were adding additional expenses.
Yes, that's correct. And then again, like I mentioned earlier, it's really early in the fiscal year.
Sure.
So we really want folks to take our current year projections can keep that in mind and know that they may change in the coming months for the good or for the bad. We'll just have to wait and see. Any other questions?
You guys got anything?
No, thank you for doing this. I think I realize like the numbers didn't move, the needle may not seem to have moved a lot, but I mean, you can already see here, you know, some of the things that I think are important for us to see, you know, things like what are the gross collections on the sales tax, you know, how property tax is doing. I mean, those things, they may not seem very interesting to folks right now, bless you. But like that to me is, you know, again, that just may have been an anomaly, who knows, right? It came in pretty close, but at the same time, it's something to keep an eye on, right? As we go through this. So, I mean, that's basically how you do municipal budgeting, right? I mean, that's exactly what you're supposed to be doing. And this, you know, as an elected official, you know, the level with which you guys are doing this is just, it's great to see. Again, having worked in a lot of places, not a lot of cities do it to the level you all do it here. So, you know, thank you for what you guys are doing on this. You all deserve a lot of praise for doing it. For folks, it's something I wish other municipal entities would be doing in the
Yeah.
state. It's not an easy thing to do,
No, it's not.
but you know, it's something here that, as an elected official, if I didn't have this as an elected official, I would be very concerned about kind of understanding which way the direction would be going financially. So thank you guys for
I
what
think
you're
that's why you're
doing.
looking over to Taylor too.
I was.
Because there's a lot of
Thank
credit for this. He pulls the data, puts it all together in the model, and spits out these charts for us.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.